Well, today's deep dive is taking us through a deeply compelling sermon that argues this phenomenon isn't just, you having a bad memory.
Right. It's not just a leaky brain.
No, it's an active, hidden sabotage. Listening to today's sermon, the overarching mission becomes incredibly clear right away. The preacher is asking a deeply uncomfortable question.
Which is,
Why do human beings so easily lose their way? Or, why do we forget profound spiritual truths so quickly?
it's a great question.
It is. And we are going to explore the roadmap to ultimate spiritual victory that this sermon provides.
I am so ready for this.
Yeah, and to do this, the preacher doesn't just stay in one place. We are taken on a journey primarily through the Gospel of Mark, but then pulled all the way back to the visceral drama of the book of Exodus.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and then finally pushed forward to the cosmic scale of the book of Revelation.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because the entry point the preacher uses is actually, it's incredibly quiet and relatable.
It really is.
It starts with a simple observation of nature. The preacher mentions walking along a river in Yokohama and noticing a short cherry blossom tree.
Right, just a normal everyday sight.
Exactly. And on this unassuming little tree, there are already 50 to 60 blossoms starting to bloom. It's a beautiful image.
It is.
But I was initially wondering, why does a sermon about massive spiritual obstacles start with a bit of local botany?
Well, what's fascinating here is how the preacher uses that specific image to establish the baseline of God's design.
Okay, how so?
The cherry blossom isn't just a sign of spring. In today's sermon, it symbolizes divine order and the promise of seasonal fruitfulness.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, the preacher immediately connects this blossoming tree in Yokohama to the majestic imagery in the book of Revelation.
Wait, specifically the tree of life, right?
Exactly. The tree of life, which is described as yielding its fruit every single month with leaves that never wither.
That's quite the contrast to a regular cherry tree.
Right. And the foundational premise being set up is that God fundamentally desires and has engineered the universe for you to bear good fruit.
So the potential for a blooming, spiritually rich life is already baked into the system.
Precisely.
So if the system is designed for us to bloom, the obvious question is, why do we so often feel like we're withering?
That is the million-dollar question.
And that brings us to the core text of the sermon, which is Mark chapter 4. This is the famous scene where Jesus is sitting in a boat teaching a massive crowd gathered on the shore.
Delivering the parable of the sower.
Right. But the detail the preacher hones in on is a specific warning Jesus gives the crowd. He says, "Whoever has ears to hear, let them hear."
It's a very specific phrasing.
It is, and I have to admit, that phrase always baffled me a bit. I mean, why does Jesus need to tell a crowd of people who obviously have physical ears and are actively listening to him to, hear?
Well, if you connect this to the bigger picture, Jesus is drawing a sharp distinction between biological hearing and spiritual reception.
Okay, I'm following.
It goes back to your opening analogy of the leaky bucket. You can hear the words, comprehend the syntax, and even feel a momentary emotional high.
Yeah, that lunchtime memory wipe.
Exactly. The preacher points out that this surface-level comprehension is incredibly fragile. It is spoken in today's sermon that there are active, hidden forces working behind the scenes.
And these aren't just passive memory lapses, right?
No, not at all. They are deliberate obstacles designed to uproot the seed of the word before it can ever germinate in your life.
Which brings us to the main event, unmasking these 3 hidden obstacles. Listening to today's sermon, you really realize these aren't just ancient metaphors.
No, they're very real today.
They're incredibly aggressive forces operating in our daily lives right now. So the first obstacle the preacher identifies is the seed that falls along the path.
Right, the birds come and eat it up.
Exactly. This represents Satan, who the sermon describes as an active deceiver who immediately snatches the truth away.
But the method of deception is what's really unsettling.
Yeah, it's not portrayed as some cartoonish villainy with pitchforks.
No, the mechanism is much more insidious.
Yeah.
The preacher highlights that Satan often disguises himself as an angel of light or a false peacemaker.
A false peacemaker. That's so dangerous because it's so subtle.
Exactly. The deception works precisely because it looks like a solution. It looks like safety.
It whispers that the profound truth you just heard are actually foolish or unnecessary or just overly demanding.
And then it offers a more comfortable, immediate alternative.
Right. And the preacher uses a very specific, modern political example to illustrate how incredibly hard it is to spot this kind of false peace.
Yeah, this part was striking.
The sermon mentions a Japanese prime minister who praised Donald Trump as a peacemaker.
Hmm.
But then the preacher points out the sheer complexity of that claim by referencing sudden military strikes on Iran and, controversial remarks regarding Pearl Harbor.
Showing how people question if that label of peacemaker is actually accurate in real time.
Exactly.
Now, wait, before we go any further, it is absolutely vital to clarify how this example functions.
Yes, definitely.
In today's sermon, the preacher is not making a political endorsement of any kind, nor are they condemning a specific administration.
Right. And we, as hosts, are also remaining strictly neutral. We're not taking any political sides here.
Exactly. The preacher is merely utilizing this highly charged, recognizable political moment to illustrate a profound human limitation.
Which is that it's incredibly difficult for us, in real time, to discern who is actually bringing true peace and who is bringing chaos.
Exactly. If world leaders and global populations struggle to identify true peace in the geopolitical sphere, imagine how much more vulnerable our individual hearts are to spiritual deception disguised as peace.
That makes perfect sense. It's about our terrifyingly flawed radar for truth.
Yeah, it's a great way to put it.
So if the first obstacle is an external deception, a false peace, what happens when the threat drops the disguise and becomes overtly hostile?
That brings us to the second obstacle.
Right, the seed falling on rocky ground. The preacher links this to persecution and the deep-seated fear of death or societal rejection.
It's a very primal fear.
It is. The sermon references the brutal martyrdoms of early church figures like Stephen and James.
Really heavy stuff.
Yeah. Now, if I look at my own life, I'm not facing the threat of literal execution for my beliefs on my morning commute.
Thankfully.
Right. But the preacher argues this obstacle is just as potent today. How does that translate for us sitting in an office or on a train?
Well, the underlying mechanism of the rocky ground is the paralysis of fear. While you might not face literal lions, human beings are profoundly social creatures.
Oh, totally. We need that acceptance.
Right. So the fear of social death, of being ostracized, mocked, or losing your professional standing, that triggers the exact same survival instincts.
That is so true.
When the seed of truth demands that you stand out or make a decision that contradicts the culture around you, the rocky ground is that sudden panic of self-preservation.
You just abandon the truth because the cost of holding on to it suddenly feels too socially or personally expensive.
Exactly. The roots simply cannot push through the hard rock of our deeply ingrained fear of rejection.
That is painfully relatable. We will trade ultimate truth for temporary social comfort almost every single time.
Sadly, yes.
But as challenging as that is, the third obstacle genuinely stopped me in my tracks.
Oh, the thorns.
Yes, the seed falling among thorns. The preacher defines this as worldly wealth and desires, and the modern example used in today's sermon is so specific, it feels like a direct call-out.
It really hits close to home.
It does. The preacher talks about the obsession with buying a 100 million yen apartment in Tokyo, taking on a crushing 30-year mortgage, all just to be able to boast about your lifestyle.
This is perhaps the most insidious of the three obstacles.
Why do you say that?
Because it is completely socially acceptable. In fact, society celebrates it.
Oh, that's a good point. You get congratulated for it.
Exactly. But let's look at the mechanics of why the preacher calls this a thorn. A 30-year mortgage on a luxury property isn't just a financial transaction.
No, it's a massive commitment.
It is a 360-month commitment of your anxiety, your labor, and your mental bandwidth.
Wow. 360 months of anxiety.
Right. The desire to maintain a certain status fundamentally rewires your priorities. The thorns grow faster than the seed.
Because you're constantly watering the thorns just to keep up appearances.
Precisely. The sheer exhausting effort required to sustain that worldly illusion of success literally chokes out any remaining energy or space for spiritual growth.
You are suffocated by your own desires.
You're trading your spiritual freedom for a concrete box, just so other people will think you're successful.
When you lay out all three of these hidden obstacles, a deceptive force actively manipulating you, a paralyzing fear of societal pushback, and the exhausting, all-consuming pursuit of wealth and status, it honestly feels like a rigged game.
It does seem pretty hopeless when you look at it like that.
How is anyone supposed to survive that gauntlet, let alone bear fruit?
Well, if the conclusion of the sermon was simply recognize these obstacles and try really hard to beat them, it would be a profoundly depressing message.
Yeah, I'd probably just give up.
Right. But this raises an important question. Who actually fights this battle? In today's sermon, the paradigm completely shifts.
Oh, how so?
The preacher reveals that Jesus has already systematically dismantled these exact obstacles.
Oh, wait, really? What?
Think about it. When Jesus spent 40 days in the wilderness, he was subjected to the ultimate temptations of wealth, power, and false peace by Satan.
Oh, the path and the thorns.
Exactly, and he defeated them. And then, when he was in the boat during a deadly storm while his disciples panicked, that's the rocky ground of the fear of death, he slept peacefully because he possessed ultimate authority.
And then he calmed the storm.
Exactly.
Wait, so the point isn't that we have to white-knuckle our way through the thorns and the rocks ourselves?
Not at all.
The point is that the person who already survived the wilderness and the storm is offering us his victory.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And to prove that God has the sheer terrifying power to overcome these massive worldly obstacles, the preacher doesn't just leave us with abstract theology.
No, we get an incredible historical example.
Right. The sermon sharply transitions to one of the most cinematic and overwhelming events in the Old Testament, Exodus chapters 14 and 15.
The parting of the Red Sea.
Yes.
The imagery the preacher uses here is phenomenal. You have millions of Israelites physically trapped. In front of them is the impossibly deep Red Sea.
And behind them.
Behind them is the greatest military superpower of the ancient world, the Egyptian army, closing in to slaughter or re-enslave them.
They're entirely out of options.
Literally trapped. And then God intervenes, splitting the ocean. The preacher compares the massive walls of water holding back the sea to those towering 10-meter-high snow walls you see carved out on mountain roads in the winter.
It's a terrifyingly beautiful image of suspended nature.
It really is.
It is a demonstration of absolute sovereignty over the physical world. The Israelites cross on dry ground, and when the Egyptian army pursues them, those 10-meter-high walls of water collapse, completely swallowing the chariots and soldiers.
Yeah, and we have to look at how the preacher frames this politically and theologically.
Yes, because it's a huge shift.
Yes, because here is where I really need to push back a little, or at least express some confusion.
Okay, lay it on me.
While recounting this epic destruction of the Egyptian army, the preacher uses a very specific phrase from the scripture, calling God a warrior ikusabito.
Right, ikusabito.
I mean, I grew up with the concept of God as a shepherd, a figure of gentle peace, someone who comforts.
It's a very comforting image.
Yeah. So this imagery of a warrior violently wiping out an entire army by drowning them in the sea is incredibly intense. It feels almost jarring compared to the gentle image of the cherry blossom at the start of the sermon.
It is a huge pivot.
Why focus on God as a destroyer?
That tension you are feeling is exactly the point. In today's sermon, God is emphatically not a passive observer who just offers gentle advice while you are being hunted.
Okay, I see.
When you are facing the absolute tyranny of slavery, which the Egyptian army represents, a gentle suggestion isn't going to save you. You need a warrior.
You need someone to actually fight for you.
Exactly. But the drowning of the Egyptians isn't just a historical military victory. The preacher explains this as a profound theological metaphor for baptism and spiritual liberation.
Wait, how does an entire army drowning equate to baptism? That seems like a stretch.
Well, think about what the Egyptian army represents to the Israelites. They are the physical embodiment of the Israelites' past.
Their slavery, their trauma, their forced labor.
Right, their absolute lack of agency. In the spiritual sense, they represent the three hidden obstacles.
The fear, the systemic deception, the bondage to worldly masters.
Exactly. So when God, as the warrior, drops the sea on top of them, he is enacting a permanent burial.
The water closes over the past.
Baptism is the death of the old enslaved self. God acts as a warrior to violently and definitively separate his people from their abusers and their sin.
Oh, wow.
So that when they step out on the other side of the sea, they are walking into the promised land as entirely new creations. The past can no longer chase them.
That is incredible. So God's aggression isn't directed at humanity. It's directed at the chains holding humanity.
Exactly. The warrior fights the obstacle so the seed can grow.
Okay, but if God is doing all the heavy lifting of burying the past, what exactly is our role?
That is the next logical step.
Because the sermon then moves to Hebrews 11 and shines a massive spotlight on Moses. And this brings us right back to the 100 million yen apartment problem.
It absolutely does. Moses is the ultimate case study in defeating the thorny ground.
Because he had it all.
Right. As the adopted grandson of Pharaoh, Moses had access to the greatest wealth, status, and luxury the ancient world could offer.
He was literally living in the ultimate luxury apartment.
Exactly. Yet he rejected all of it. He chose to identify with enslaved people and walk out into the brutal desert.
It defies all human logic. I mean, why would anyone willingly walk away from absolute comfort to embrace suffering?
It's hard to fathom.
The preacher notes that Moses gave up the fleeting pleasures of sin. But how? What was his psychological or spiritual mechanic for actually doing that?
The secret is revealed in the text the preacher quotes. It says, Moses looked at the invisible God.
Looked at the invisible.
Yes, it's entirely about focal length.
Focal length.
Yeah, think about it. The wealth of Egypt, the chariots, the status, all of that is highly visible. But in the grand timeline of eternity, it is fleeting. It rots.
Right, it doesn't last.
Moses was able to reject the visible temporary wealth because his eyes were locked onto an eternal reward that no one else could see.
Oh, I love that. He didn't let the blinding shine of Egyptian gold distract him from the ultimate reality of God's promise.
Exactly. He trained his spiritual vision to see past the thorns.
He treated the invisible as more real than the visible. That takes an incredible amount of discipline.
It really does.
And it perfectly sets up the climax of today's sermon.
Right.
Because if Moses was looking forward to an ultimate reality, the preacher takes us right to the end of the timeline to show us exactly what that reality is.
We jump to the book of Revelation, chapter 20.
And the symmetry here is just mind-blowing.
The architectural structure of the theology in this sermon is remarkable. We started with a microscopic.
Right, a tiny seed falling on a path, being choked by thorns or withered by the sun.
But in Revelation 20, the preacher shows us the cosmic conclusion. Just as the Egyptian army was swallowed and buried by the Red Sea, the end of time features a final, ultimate burial.
A final burial.
Yes. The three hidden obstacles that have plagued humanity since the beginning, Satan the deceiver, the physical reality of death, and Hades, the underworld itself, are ultimately thrown into the lake of fire.
They are permanently destroyed.
Exactly.
It's not just that humans finally learn to avoid the obstacles. It's that God, the warrior, entirely annihilates the concepts of death, fear, and evil from existence.
He completely clears the board to make way for a new heaven and a new earth.
It ensures that the cherry blossoms, the fruitfulness we talked about at the very beginning, can bloom forever without any threat of being choked out or snatched away.
It is the ultimate victory of the seed.
Wow.
What began as a vulnerable word planted in a fragile human heart culminates in a reality where the obstacles are eradicated.
And the promise of the sermon is that this cosmic victory isn't just a future event.
Right.
Because of Jesus, it is a reality you can tap into right now.
Absolutely.
This has been an incredibly intense journey. We started with the quiet beauty of 50 blooming cherry blossoms in Yokohama.
A very peaceful image.
And then we dug into the dirt to uncover the terrifying hidden forces actively trying to sabotage our lives.
The deceptive voices of false peace, the paralyzing fear of persecution, and the exhausting, thorny trap of 30-year mortgages and worldly status.
Right. And then we stood at the edge of the Red Sea to witness God stepping in as a warrior to drown the forces of slavery.
And we ended at the end of time itself, watching death and deception be thrown into the fire.
And if we bring all of this directly back to you, the listener, the application is profound.
It really is. You might just be trying to navigate the mundane stress of your week, but today's sermon asks you to accurately identify what is currently choking your potential.
Is it the anxiety of maintaining a certain lifestyle?
Or is it the fear of what your peers think of you?
Or maybe you are listening to deceptive voices that tell you spiritual growth just isn't worth the effort.
The liberating truth here is that you do not have to fight these massive, overwhelming battles entirely on your own.
Because the warrior has already defeated them.
Exactly. It fundamentally changes how you view your own struggles. You aren't just a leaky bucket.
You are a battleground, but the war has already been won by the one who calmed the storm.
Which leaves us with one final, lingering question to ponder as you go about the rest of your day.
Yes. If you were to look honestly at your life right now, what specific past or hidden obstacle is relentlessly chasing you down?
And what kind of Red Sea do you need to trust God to part so you can finally cross over and leave that obstacle buried under the water behind you?